Hi, Bill.
Hi, Conn. Welcome back.
Thanks. As always, it's good to be back here on This Week in Blog.
Matt Lewis, my regular The Week in Blog comrade, is in Turkey this week. But the original conservative side of The Week in Blog, Conn Carroll from the Heritage Foundation, making a return appearance. And I know the Commodores crave some quality Conn Carroll snark.
I was actually surprised I got such a warm reception last time I guest hosted for Matt. It felt odd to be missed.
I don't think you got that love while you were doing it.
Well, some more than others. I mean, we all know B.J. Keefe hates me. Although even he had nice things to say. So, absence makes the hearts grow fonder, I guess.
I think he likes a good scrap.
There you go.
So, why don't I let you set the table? What is on your mind today?
Well, I think the big news is the CBO score that came out yesterday. You've had a pretty uniform response on the right to the score basically.
And they're praising it because they were so upset that the early CBO scores of the House bills caused all these deficits. They were elated to find that this version actually cuts the deficit, and so they're now supporting the Baucus bill. That's right?
Surprisingly not.
Really?
Not. No.
Huh. What could they possibly say to justify their earlier support of the CBO scoring?
Well, I shall go in order. I think the biggest one, which you're seeing the leadership of the actual party embrace the most, is that it's irrelevant. Is that first of all, this is not even an official cost estimate. There is, in fact, no bill. Legal Insurrection had a post on this that was quite to the point. There is no Baucus bill. The point being is that there doesn't exactly exist any legislative language yet. All there is conceptual language, and what the CBO released yesterday was actually a preliminary analysis. So there actually is no CBO cost estimate of a Baucus bill. Anyone who says otherwise is either ignorant or lying. So that'd be point number one. Point number two would be kind of getting into more of specific criticisms of the Baucus bill, and a little bit of the CBO scoring. Megan McArdle was making this point weeks ago, basically that the CBO had signaled weeks ago that they'd be willing to score the annual Dr. Fix Medicare cuts in the bill, which amounts to $200 billion over 10 years. The punchline being is that Congress has consistently overruled these Medicare cost cuts, so that, in fact, when the Baucus bill says it's going to be $81 billion in the black, when you factor in that in all likelihood Congress is just going to ignore these cuts too, it really goes back to being $120 billion in the red. Another point made I guess mostly by us, but my other prize people, is that although I think Ezra, of course he doesn't call it this, but Ezra's made a similar point.
Ezra Klein,
we'll get to that, is that basically the Baucus bill is basically just a Medicare monster, a Medicaid monster. Baucus bill increases the number of Americans that have insurance by 29 million. Half of those people, 14 million, get their new insurance coverage through the expansion of Medicaid. So, in other words, all this bill really is a super-duper S-chip on steroids. And, of course, all this has cost the states. I mean, another way the Baucus bill is able to keep it in the black.
Ezra Klein opposes the bill, you understand?
No. But I'll get to Ezra's post later, but he makes pretty much the same argument. His post is titled "Meet the New Healthcare System, Same as the Old Healthcare System," which is, a critique that we would definitely make.
That wasn't a criticism by Ezra.
Right. Well, we'll get into the left in a bit. Let me finish off the right's criticisms, which is, fourth and finally, that another way that the Baucus bill stays in the black is $311 billion in new taxes, including a 40% tax on health insurance that is over $21,000 a year for a family of four, which, since it's indexed to inflation but not medical inflation, will quickly include more and more middle-class families. So those would be the four main critiques that conservative bloggers have of the CBO cost analysis.
My medical advice to the conservative blogosphere is to be careful not to strain their shoulder too much with all these reaches to been wildly away from embracing CBO in the past when they had scores that you embraced, and now coming across a score that apparently you don't like because having a healthcare bill that actually cuts the deficit seems to not really what you want. You don't want any bill at all.
Well, I don't see the hypocrisy or flip-flop here. I mean, all we want is a real score of real legislation, which this isn't.
Well, I mean, the notion that this is a fake score. I mean, if you're going to hang your hat on that, I mean, you have to really believe that. I mean, and I think it was, and forgive me if I'm putting the words in the wrong blogger's mouth, but I think it was. It was Mary Catherine Ham, who I've sparred on Twitter about CBO several times in the last few weeks. I think she said that there's no way the Democrats are going to have a real CBO score before the final vote on this, which is just, it's just wrong. There is going to, I mean,
is there?
Let's explain what's happened here. Senate Finance Committee regularly does their initial legislative drafting in plain English language and not arcane legislative language. That's how they've always done their business. And quite frankly, it's a useful tool to actually be able to watch, to be able to watch C-SPAN, actually follow the debate, understand what your representatives are doing. It's actually a great way to go about doing business.
I'm with you so far. Keep going.
And then they had a preliminary CBO score based on the plain English language. And soon after, they're going to translate the plain English language into the arcane legislative language, and CBOs will do a new fuller estimate on that. But there is no expectation that this estimate is going to be wildly different. And if it was, they're going to know before a final vote, and they're going to go back and change things, which, again, is an extremely unlikely scenario.
Whoa. So you're telling me that, well, let's fill in for the readers what the rest of this process is going to look like, is that Harry Reid is going to then come out basically with a brand new health care bill.
He's going to somehow merge the Senate Finance bill, which is all likely to pass on Tuesday. He's going to merge that in some fashion with the bill that came out of the Senate Health Committee. With the biggest difference between the two is that the Health Committee has a public option and the Senate Finance bill.
Well, do you remember what the last CBO score of the Health Committee bill was?
I forget the actual number, but I know it wasn't deemed a deficit cut. But also, it was the health bill doesn't have the jurisdiction over the tax elements of the bill. So you have a big gaping hole in the Health Committee legislation, which the Finance Committee filled with this excise tax on insurance companies when they offer very generous health care plans, which CBO thinks is a great way to not just raise some revenue, but curtail healthcare spending overall. And I know you're very aware that there's some division on the left about that provision.
Right.
But that's the biggest reason why the finance bill is scored as a deficit cut and the health bill.
Well, let's go ahead and put some numbers on that. The final Health Committee bill score was $600 billion in the red. And so now we have a Senate Finance Committee bill that's $81 billion in the black. So Harry Reid's about to write a bill that has to big.
He's not going to split the difference on those numbers, I assure you.
Well, no, see, that's just it. Is how is that bill going to look? And to get back to the original fight with
patently obvious. All of the maneuvering that's been going on, every step of the way has all been how do we make CBO happy? There is no way, no how, that a bill is going to go to the Senate floor or the House floor or the final House-Senate Conference Committee. There's absolutely no way they're going to put a bill on the floor that CBO doesn't score as a deficit neutral or a deficit cut. I will bet anything on that.
Well, I don't know if we'll be able to have that bet because, to go back to your original fight with Mary Catherine Ham, is there going to be a final actual CBO cost estimate?
Of course there is.
Really? Before they vote?
Yes.
Before they vote?
Of course there is. Are you insane?
No, I'm not insane. They didn't vote on the stimulus. They didn't vote. They didn't have a final CBO estimate on the S-chip bill. I don't think there's been a final actual CBO estimate of scoring language on anything the Democrats have passed this year.
I'm not 100%. I actually don't know that to be the case or not. But I guarantee you on this, there's been such intensity on this point. And conservatives have been pushing all this time. You need to have 72 hours before the votes. The bill should be online, all that stuff. And you've won those arguments.
We have?
Yes.
It hasn't happened yet.
It just happened with this Senate Finance version, and I guarantee you it's going to happen with the final version that are put before the floor.
It didn't happen with this finance version. We were pushing for a full CBO cost estimate of the finance bill before it came out.
You guys want to just throw delay whenever you can. What's actually going to happen is before the final version is done, there's going to be that window, there's going to be a full CBO score, because all the Blue Dogs and Olympia Snow won't vote for it unless they get that. So even if they didn't want to do it, they're going to have to do it. And so if you guys are going to hang your hat on, this is a fake score and this is all a big, smoke and mirrors, what are you going to say when the actual CBO score comes? I don't know. Whatever it is, it's not going to be in support of the bill. I'm sure about that.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and bet that it ain't going to be there by the Senate first votes on this.
Do you want to bet? Do we have a blogging heads bet?
We'll have a blogging heads bet.
What do you want to bet?
We will bet that when the first votes start occurring on the Senate floor, that the CBO will not have a cost estimate of whatever Harry Reid produces.
I will take that bet. What shall we bet?
Dinner.
You will have to come up to Western Massachusetts and have dinner with me
you come down to D.C. every now and then. Don't pretend like you're never in town.
I think you should have to take a trip up here, though. I think that should be the bet. You have to come up here and officiate over a gay marriage in Massachusetts.
Now, I have 2 kids. You have 1. So I know you know how tough it is to get out of town.
I know.
Okay.
I know. Well, we will do dinner in D.C. When I win.
So speaking of what Reid has to do in merging the Baucus bill, there were some interesting posts on the left that I thought were of note. And they both build off of the point that Michael Tanner over at Cato was making about this 40% tax on health insurance, which is that the unions hate it. And so Tim Finholtz had a post at the American Prospect, and Iglesias also had a post linking to Tim's, both along the lines is that healthcare has a union problem. And so I guess my question to you is, one, how would you want this problem to be solved? And 2, how do you think it's going to be solved?
Well, how I'd want to be. I'm not a big fan of the excise tax. I think the unions have a very good point that they have negotiated away wage increases often for better benefits. So even though there's this notion that it is going to tax wealthier people because they're more expensive plans, the fact is there are middle-class people that have those plans. So I'm sympathetic to the argument. But I think the hard reality is that CBO loves this strategy because they believe it's not just a revenue raiser, that it will be a disincentive to offer plans of that nature, and therefore would be an overall way to bend the cost curve over time. So I think you're going to have some version of it. I don't know if it's going to be in the exact form that Baucus has it now, and they're still haggling over the House how they want to structure it. It's not. I don't believe it's in either the
Pelosi
version
and a bunch of progressives signed a letter saying no way, no how.
I know it's a contentious point, but I think they're going to have to split the baby on that somehow, because CBO has made such a point about it. And again, I don't think they can pass a bill. They can't keep the caucus unified without having that CBO score. I mean, I made an argument on ourfuture.org a while back that we shouldn't be treating the CBO as gospel. I think they're biased against new ideas that save costs, and the White House feels the same way. It's one of the reasons why the White House wants to have what they call a deficit trigger, to say, hey, if these cost savings don't materialize, we'll have no choice but to cut other things, because they believe so strongly that their ideas will save more money than CBO projects. But they're not taking the point so far where they've actually challenged CBO's, quote unquote moral authority within Washington. Everyone is treating CBO as the referee, and they're all dancing around to their tune. And the only difference is, I think, between Democrats and Republicans on this score is that Democrats, they might grouse about CBO in some corners, but they're still adhering to their dictates. Conservatives and Republicans mainly have praised CBO when the scores are to their liking, and then denigrated CBO when they haven't been.
We have not denigrated CBO. How have we denigrated CBO? We've been saying let CBO do their job. Who has denigrated CBO? Name some names.
Well, let me put it this way. Is there any conservative anywhere in the United States that has accepted the CBO scores on the House climate bill?
We've criticized what the CBO said, in the sense that they were very open about what they were not doing, and that they were not actually having a cost analyst of what the cap and trade would actually do. In fact, it was just an accounting of how the taxes would be spent, which is just an explanation of what the CBO did, and is not a criticism of them. It's like it's more of, this is what the CBO is saying, and this is how the media is portraying it is wrong, which is the same thing we're doing with the CBO now. Is that the New York Times ran their headline today, CBO gives healthcare bill the green light, which is just terrible, because no, they gave this empty, non-existent Baucus bill a good score, not what is eventually going to come out. That's a criticism of what the New York Times and what the Democrats are going to do with it. That's not a criticism of what the CBO did.
You're hurting my shoulder now. You're reaching so hard. It's really, ow, it hurts.
Fine. If you consider that a criticism of the CBO, okay. But I think it's more of a criticism of how the CBO is being misused by others. Is there any other? I just wanted to bring up one other healthcare item, which is something that we've been pushing here at the Heritage Foundation. That got picked up by Michelle Malkin and Rush Limbaugh, and that is the secret plan to pass Obamacare. Now, I know there's also lots of talk and consternation on the left.
Does Obama have a health care plan that he hasn't talked about?
No, not
is it hidden somewhere?
This is all procedure. So there's lots of talk on the left of how many times the Senate will have to have a cloture vote, how many times Democrats will have to get 60 in order to get Obamacare passed. And, of course, you want to minimize those number of times, and there's talk about, will Lincoln and Nelson, will they actually vote for cloture and then vote against the bill? And so you want to minimize the number of times you can do that. And so we have been hearing lots of rumors, which Harry Reid's office has confirmed that they are considering a plan that would make it so that there would only be one cloture vote that the Democrats had to make, and it would be before any amendments were considered, so that you wouldn't actually have to have a cloture vote on the public option or any of the other messy stuff that they don't want to have to get 60 on.
How is that a secret plan?
Well, because they haven't talked about it yet. Is that these are rumors they have. If it was an open plan, they'd be like, hey, this is what we're going to do.
Well, and maybe they haven't been able to determine they can actually do that yet. They're talking about it with other senators. But this is how every major bill got passed under Bush. If you try to get your votes on cloture, if you can't get people to support the underlying bill, it's not totally nefarious. It's basic legislating in the Senate.
Well, not every vote. I mean, what we're talking about here is that H.R. 1586 is actually it's the TARP reachback bill, so it's a tax bill. So what Harry Reid's going to do is he's going to take this TARP bill, completely gut it, and then insert whatever healthcare legislation he actually writes as an amendment, and then he'd be able to get it on the floor, and he would then file a cloture motion to in debate so that they could then actually start taking amendments. And so once they got past that first 60 vote threshold, then they could have regular 50-50 up or down votes on amendments, including...
I know conservatives can't stand up and down votes on Senate bills. They hate it.
No, we love them. So then they wouldn't have to actually... they'd have the cloture vote before the public option was ever in the bill. Then they could have an up or down vote, so Lincoln and Nelson and all of them could vote against the public option, but it would still pass on a 50-vote threshold. Then if that went straight to the House and Harry Reid was able to work it so that they ironed out their differences with Pelosi beforehand, the House could just go ahead and approve that up or down, and it wouldn't even have to ever go to a conference committee. It could go straight to President Obama's desk.
That sounds horrible. How dare they use legislative procedure?
Well, my question is that you read Open Left, and Mike Lux has a post about how the conference committee really matters, and it's mostly about how there's not a lot of love on the left for the Baucus bill. John Walker at Fire Dog Lake has a number of posts about how terrible the Baucus bill is. In fact, he even adopted the conservative line. The title of his post is "CBO didn't really score the Baucus bill," and so there
well,
is.
That's not really characterizing that post accurately.
Is that not in the headline?
There's a particular provision that John Walker thought that CBO should have scored. He was not saying that CBO did not score the entire bill. He wasn't making the conservative point that the plain English language is somehow irrelevant. Just there was a particular provision of, I think it was on the deficit trigger, that he thought that they should have scored. That it's not the biggest point that John Walker has against the Baucus.
But back to my original point, which was that there is lots of things that the left and the progressives don't like about the Baucus bill, one of which we already covered being the tax on health insurance. So the title of Mike Luck's post is the conference committee really matters this time. And so I guess my question to you is, how do you see that working out? Do you think the progressives would roll over so that they could get a quick bill through that didn't have to go back through conference? Or do you think the progressives will really raise a stink and demand a conference and force the Senate to have two cloture votes on Obamacare?
They're not going to make procedural arguments for the sake of making procedural arguments. As far as progressives are concerned, obviously the ultimate thing is whether they get a strong public option in the bill. And I think as a somewhat of a secondary matter, there's concern about the Baucus tax structure. They'd rather do what the House is doing as far as having a surcharge on the wealthiest taxpayers, those in the top 1%. But that's obviously a rough go in the Senate. So I doubt that progressives would, if they actually got the strong public option, I don't think they would sink the bill over the tax provisions, as uncomfortable as it makes them. So as far as if people are feeling that procedure is being used in a way to shunt some of the liberal ideas to the side, then you might see more of an outcry. But most of the indication the past few days is they're trying to get some form of public option in the bill, and then the question becomes, okay, is it going to qualify as a strong public option, or is it going to be something that's flimsy? And I do wonder, and I don't know the answer to this. You probably saw in Huffington Post yesterday, and I think Chuck Schumer on MSNBC confirmed it today, there is a push for a national public option that states could choose to opt out of. And that's a twist on what Senator Thomas Carper was pushing, which was more of like, okay, states can just sort of opt in on their own volition. To be able to start with a national plan that some states might choose to leave would leave you with a larger plan that would have more bargaining leverage and have more ability to compete with private insurance. Richard Kirsch at HCAN told the Huffington Post that they would be amenable to that. Jane Hampshire at Fire Dog Lake thought that was as bad as saying Roe v. Wade should be dealt on a state-by-state basis. So I don't know where that falls as far as what progressives will say about it. But as far as all the ideas that I've seen that are public option compromises, that's probably one that leaves you with the strongest plan at the end of the day.
I mean, my question is, I guess what I'm hearing from you is that the public option really is, number one, that they're able to get a Schumer opt-in public option, that they would gladly trade that over any of the tax concerns that the unions are raising.
I don't know if gladly is the word, but there's been far more grassroots energy put towards the public option question. The tax question has something that's only really been discussed with a smaller group of insiders. Obviously, the union leaders are very concerned about it, but there hasn't been the same level of mass outcry about it as of yet. Maybe that would change. Maybe if the public option got won, maybe the union leadership would be able to whip up more concern about that. We haven't seen that yet, so I'm. As just being a prognosticator, I wouldn't think that would be something that would sink the bill at the end of the day. But hey, I could be wrong.
Okay, enough about healthcare. Let's talk jobs.
There's been a lot of buzz over the past few days about Obviously, unemployment has gone up over the course of the year. It's something that the White House I don't think is all that blindsided by. They always expected unemployment to go up this year. They always projected to eventually hit 10%, which it hasn't hit yet. But I think there's a concern that perhaps it's accelerating at even a faster pace that they've been able to manage. The attitude, I think, amongst all Democrats in the White House is the stimulus has been a positive thing. It has helped mitigate these issues, but that the problem was just bigger in the first place, and the stimulus wasn't big enough to match, the demand gap that had been created, by the recession. So there's talk about what can you do additionally on top of the stimulus to help tamp that number down and make the recession less painful.
And of course, the wonderful part about this for conservatives is that watching the White House and the left keep trying to say, no, the stimulus isn't failing, we're just tweaking it or adding on to it.
Well, I mean that's a debate you can have. If something is not working, is it that the idea itself was rotten and made things worse, or just missed the target altogether, or was it the generally right idea but didn't go quite far enough to solve the problem at hand? At the time, liberal economists were saying, look, this is the demand gap, and this is the size of the stimulus. It's not big enough. It's not something that was an argument made up all of a sudden. Obama himself said, look, the economists are telling us that we need to have a 2-year stimulus between $800 billion and $1.3 trillion, and they ended up at 780. So by Obama's own accounting, they came up a little bit short, and that was because they had to appease right-leaning Democrats and Republican moderates just to get the thing through at all. And so it's better to get something through and be able to mitigate the recession to some degree than to have nothing. But actually what has happened is exactly what liberal economists, and I'll quote some in a second, but Robert Kuttner and Dean Baker, Robert Reich, everyone said, look, this is better than nothing, but you'll at best stop the bleeding, but you're not going to launch a robust recovery. And that's what we have right now. We haven't gone to the abyss. We haven't had the Great Depression that people are worried about right now, but things are kind of flat, and obviously hiring in particular is lagging considerably. So it's not something that people have to scramble to revise what they said before. What's happening is exactly what they did say was going to happen.
Yeah, it's a jobless recovery. The own metric that Obama created for his stimulus was jobs, and he's failing miserably. And the voters are noticing that, and there is a lot of worry on the left, and there should be. I found there was a post by Doug Schoen, who's a Democratic consultant.
Barely Democratic. And
he's been doing some work for the Kauffman Foundation on entrepreneurship. And so he had a bunch of poll results showing how Americans support entrepreneurship these days. Americans say the economy is on the wrong track by 54%. They remain skeptical about their personal economic situation, et cetera, and that they emphasize the need for private sector growth. 71% think we'll go through a period of long-term higher unemployment. 85% think that we need policies to make it easier to start a business. So I thought it was great that we had a Democrat talking about making it easier to start a business, and that 83% of Americans believe that our economy has been and will be continually led by entrepreneurs. That's all great. So then I was interested to see what the policy punchline of this would be, and it came in like the 8th paragraph. In response to these sentiments, the Obama administration has taken steps to promote entrepreneurship and make entrepreneurial activity a central part of their efforts to revitalize and grow the economy. Recently, the Commerce Department Secretary Gary Locke announced the establishment of the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which will help leverage the entire federal government on behalf of promoting entrepreneurship in America. So the solution for big government regulations, of course, is a new big government entity to leverage the entire federal government on promoting entrepreneurship, which I just thought was extremely funny and contradictory, and shows how the left pretty much has no new ideas on how to create jobs.
Well, one, I think it is a bit disingenuous to say that is the only idea that has been discussed to do in addition to the stimulus, which again, the stimulus has had a positive impact. It's not a big enough impact. You're also presuming what it is this new office is going to do. It could actually do things that you might like. It hasn't even begun yet, so it's a little early to be criticizing its approach. What the White House has already been talking about are ideas that some conservatives like. They want to extend the home buying tax credit.
Whoa. Some conservatives, you mean Johnny Isaacson and other pro-business conservatives. Pro-business. Those are not conservatives' ideas. Those are pro-business subsidies for certain industries that are terrible public policy.
Some conservatives like those ideas. I would not call them classically liberal ideas. And also having a tax credit for a business to hire new jobs. I know Greg Mankiw doesn't like that, but I think some conservatives do. It's not an inherently liberal idea. Most liberal economists derided it when it was floated during the stimulus and it wasn't included, and now you're seeing folks like Robert Reich saying, hey, at least we got to give it a shot because we need to try to do fire every bullet in our gun to mitigate this the best we can. So they've always, the initial stimulus was a mix of public investment and tax
cuts that Republicans all thought were stupid and would not spur job growth, and they haven't because they're terrible public policy, just like the new ones they're talking about.
I think most Republicans criticize anything that comes out of Obama's mouth, regardless of where the idea originally originated from. But those types of tax cuts are the exact same kinds of tax cuts that the Bush administration supported all this time. They've always had a mix of liberal and conservative ideas in the stimulus. Liberals have said, hey, this would have been a better stimulus if you didn't have the tax cuts that aren't as effective and you had more public investment. The White House said, we want to do as much public investment as we can, but there's only so much you can spend over a short period of time, and tax cuts at least have the advantage of going quickly. So they're trying to build on both types of ideas, and I think you're seeing in the progressive economic blogosphere all sorts of ideas being discussed.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about Robert Reich's four ideas, because there is one of them that you would, I think, get wide support of conservatives with, and I'll bet you'll be able to guess which one.
The payroll tax holiday?
Yes. Spoiling my punchline again. But anyways, let's just the other three or four in order that Robert Reich talks about is number one, using existing authority under both the stimulus package enacted earlier this year and the nefarious TARP bailout fund to make up to basically bail out states, give them more money so that they don't have to cut their budgets.
And that was a concession that was made to those Senate moderates, right-leaning Democrats, to cut down the size of the stimulus in the first place. And I can speak to this just in my own town. It's happening in towns everywhere. The stimulus was better than nothing as far as state and local governments were concerned, but there are still budget gaps all across the nation, and they're having to be forced to cut services and raise taxes because they have no choice. They can't deficit spend the way the federal government can. And when they have to make those choices, that undermines it's anti-stimulus when they have to raise local taxes or cut local services. Yes,
but again, federal government bailouts and government spending is hardly a new liberal idea. Number two under Reich's proposal.
Well, it may not be new, but it doesn't work.
Number two is the proposed one-year payroll tax holiday on the first $20,000 of income. Number three is give small businesses a new jobs tax credit, which, as you mentioned, Greg Mankiw is
totally
against.
left-wing idea.
And number four was dramatically expand the Small Business Administration's lending program, which I thought the Obama administration already did.
Well, again, it's a question of degree.
But from what I read, it's not working. Like, they haven't actually increased spending at all, even though they're trying to. So we got those four ideas. And so my, of course, interest is on number two, the payroll tax holiday, and what you think the chances are of the Obama administration and or the left embracing that idea.
As far as the left, I could not say. As far as the
but you're a watcher of the left. That's why we have you on This Week in Blog, because you're an expert
my
on
role
the left.
on this segment has never been to speak for the entirety of the
left. No,
but
you can offer your opinion on the chances that they would go for that.
I mean, I think it depends. If that was like the lone idea that they had, they did nothing else, I think probably liberals would say that that's pretty weak. But as part of a larger, multi-pronged effort to jumpstart job creation, they might be able to accept it among other things. I think it all depends about the context. And I think what people I think there is at least a certain degree of relief, because people on the left are push for a bigger stimulus in the first place. They always warned you were going to need a second stimulus because this would come up a little bit short, even if it was going to stop some of the bleeding. I think there is some relief that at least we're talking about these ideas. That at least there's a recognition that if you want to make sure this recession doesn't get too deep, you have to do more stuff at the federal government level, and at least that discussion is being had, and there's a clear recognition by the White House that they do need to do more things.
I forget where I saw this. It was either on Fire.Lake or Tapped, but one of the liberal commentators, one of the liberal bloggers, was talking about how terrible Robert Reich's idea was for the payroll tax because it will never be temporary and that it will become permanent. And I'll be honest with you, that's why I like it.
Well, again, I'm not saying that, I'm not taking a personal stand on the issue. Excuse me while I had to plug in my computer. But you mentioned this about Megan McArdle's argument about health care. The notion that, well, once they do that, once the Medicare Commission comes into effect, Congress will overturn it. You know that's going to happen. Well, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the payroll tax will be permanent.
You're right. You're right. I do. I don't know that. I do know as a Republican I would like to campaign on it.
Well, that may be. You may be campaign to do what?
Oh, to make it permanent.
Okay. Well, there'd be that risk involved, but it doesn't automatically mean that would be the case. That they can say this could be a temporary thing to deal with the recession, a finite recessionary period, and that you'd pull it back after it was done. It could happen that way, but you don't know, and maybe it's a political risk that conservatives would come in and gut the financing we have for Social Security and Medicare right now by doing that. But I think there's some division on the left about payroll taxes in general because payroll taxes are inherently regressive. It's essentially a flat tax. So there's some liberals that don't like the payroll tax and some people that worry about how it would affect Social Security and Medicare. So the nice thing about all of this is I think we're actually having some rich policy discussions somewhere in the country. They're not just falling down clearly left-right lines, and the White House seems to be open to ideas from all sides, which is something that the right really gives them credit for.
Speaking of stuff the right wants to give Obama credit for, and I think there was legitimate optimism, definitely in this building, definitely here at Heritage, in March up until last week, there was legitimate optimism and faith that Obama was going to do the right thing in Afghanistan. And of course that has completely deteriorated over the past 2 weeks. So
now we'll keep going. And just as a warning, I got 15 minutes before I need to jump for.
Okay, so we'll make Afghanistan really short. Basically, you saw lots of talk about Stanley McChrystal's speech in London, and many on the left, including Glenn Greenwald, thought that maybe there were some constitutional concerns in McChrystal openly airing his honest opinion about what was needed to be done in Afghanistan, and you saw a number of people criticizing on the left the White House's handling of the issue. You had Michael Cohen at at Democracy Arsenal, part of the New America Foundation, starting an article in the Washington Post about divisions between the civilian and military commanders, or civilian and military people in the White House, and he concludes this way: but the performance of the civilian policymakers is almost as bad, if not worse. There seems to be a complete lack of planning, forethought, and direct communication between civilian policymakers and the military about what a robust counterinsurgency mission would entail. What's more, if Raji's reporting is correct, it sure seems as though the core assumptions about U.S. national interests and capabilities in Afghanistan, with the notable exception of Tony Blinken, went basically unchallenged. I'm glad to see that the President and his advisors are now having discussion on the issue, but it would have been nice if they had this robust conversation in March before we got into this mess. To which my response is, this is just completely predictable. I, for one, never really believed Obama's rhetoric on Afghanistan. I remember covering a panel at the convention, and it was the main speaker was the head of MoveOn.org, and he was talking about the restlessness of their members. And he said it was probably likely that the left would start moving against the Afghanistan war, even with an Obama presidency. So as an observer of the left, where do you see the left's energies going when it comes to the war in Afghanistan?
Afghanistan, I think, makes a good chunk of the left very uncomfortable. I think they're very much worried about it being a quagmire and a money suck. But, it's not coming from I wouldn't say it's coming from a knee-jerk pacifist place. I don't use the word pacifist as a pejorative, but I think there is even people I know who want the large-scale troop presence there to be gone would still say we still should have counterterrorism, we still should have special forces, we still should be pursuing Al-Qaeda. I don't really know anyone who thinks we should just be abandoning Afghanistan altogether. So this largely comes down to it. I think the critique that this conversation wasn't had in March and now they're having it now, I think is a little misplaced. They did have a conversation in March.
Well, no, I mean I think you need to go back and read the Post and that.
I read the article.
Well, the main point is that there is it's a night and day difference between what Biden wants to do and what McChrystal wants to do. And
tactically,
yeah. I mean, tactically and tactically and resource-wise. I mean, one requires an order of magnitude more troops and more resources, and one allows you to just kind of keep it the same and muddle through as you were before.
Well, that's an opinion judgment on your part what the results would be. But the point is that I'm trying to make is there is a basic agreement on what the strategic goal, in a very basic way. The strategic goal is to disrupt and dismantle Al-Qaeda. They don't have a neoconservative goal of permanent military base in Afghanistan. They don't have a political goal, let's say, of propping up a specific leader in Afghanistan.
Who does?
I might argue that the Bush administration had more of an interest in propping up a leader in Afghanistan and more of an interest of establishing a permanent military presence and less of an interest of actually going after Al-Qaeda.
I don't remember strong, true love for Karzai. I remember Karzai always being, the best guy that was there. But I don't think anyone really wanted to, really was in Afghanistan to, continue the magnificence that is Ahmed Karzai.
What you said, what I just said, I wouldn't think is all that different. So the debate that's being had now, it seems, and I'm not terribly trustful of all this reporting because so much of it is based on leaks and anonymous quotes. But there's going to be a tactical difference. What does it mean to be able to disrupt Al-Qaeda? Can you do something that's more of a narrowly targeted counterterrorism strategy, or do you need a broader-based counterinsurgency strategy, which would involve more of a degree of nation-building on the presumption that if you don't have a stable Afghanistan government, invariably Al-Qaeda is going to have the ability to plant roots and recruit.
Well, let's stipulate that neither of us are experts on Afghanistan, but we are more experts on what our bases would react. And if Obama came out with a full-on endorsement of McChrystal's 40,000 and an Afghanistan surge, the Republican Party would be 100% behind him, and so would the conservative blogosphere. What would be in your opinion, the liberal reaction to an Obama-led Afghanistan surge?
I think the liberal blogosphere, the leading lights liberal blogosphere, would be absolutely opposed to that. I think there's definitely a concern has taken hold that level of troop presence would invariably mean a quagmire, that you're not learning the lessons of history of dealing with Afghanistan, and that's not the best way to go about the problem. I'm not as convinced that would be as uniform in opinion amongst the left broadly.
Who do you think would support him other than Peter Boehner? Who do you think would support the president other than Peter Boehner?
Oh, I don't know that there necessarily would be, individual. Some Democrats certainly would. I mean, you already had.
Well, I meant more bloggers, more our community than actual people in Congress.
I don't know of a liberal blogger that would get on board with it. I'm just saying that
I agree.
There's a difference between liberal blogosphere and liberal base and left of center America generally. I think there's more internal conflict about what to do. I think there's a general appreciation this is just a bad situation with no good solutions. A certain degree of trust that Obama still has, that he's not trying to have a unnecessary military presence if he doesn't have to. He doesn't have an ulterior neoconservative motive there that gets him a little bit more leeway to do stuff militarily. An appreciation that the troops are being reduced in Iraq, that there is diplomatic engagement in Iran, so it's not that there's some sort of widespread, warmongering policy here. But as far as specific policy strategy, I think a lot of liberal bloggers, led by Robert Greenwald at Rethink Afghanistan, are making a strategic argument that is not a good strategy to take if you want to actually deal with Al-Qaeda. It's not that we don't care about Al-Qaeda. We want to see everything fall apart. Just that we think it's people think it's a bad strategy. So it would be a bit of a break between Obama and a portion of the liberal base if he took McChrystal's recommendations in full. It doesn't look like that's the direction he's going to go in, but at the same time, Obama did tell Congress this week, we're not leaving anytime soon. It's just a question of degree and the tactical direction of that military presence. So I guess I have a harder time understanding what the conservative approach to this is. They're so committed to this specific strategy, but obviously most people involved in politics are not military experts. Why would you say, I go at these things largely from a strategic goal perspective because I can only offer so much opinion as an average citizen. If you think that we need to be in Afghanistan militarily, and Obama is going to be in Afghanistan militarily for some degree, would you at least take some solace in that he is going in the same basic strategic direction you guys want?
No, because he either is going to stay in Afghanistan and devote not enough resources so that it fails like pre-surge Iraq fails, or he's going to put in the amount of resources that the situation requires and is going to adopt a Iraq-like surge policy, and from the point of view of conservatives, actually trying to achieve the right strategic goals.
Well, that would be a tactical disagreement. You'd say, I guess I would question the,
Well, you were talking about lessons of history. The lesson of history that the left says is, Vietnam and other past conflicts in Afghanistan, that there's no way that adding more resources and troops would get the goals that you want. And conservatives look at Iraq. Conservatives look at Iraq and draw the opposite lesson from history. There's the divide for you right there.
Well, and obviously conservatives take a different lesson from Vietnam than liberals do.
No, I'm just saying they're looking at a different history lesson, being the one in Iraq.
That as well. People take different lessons. I understand that. I guess my question is, wouldn't conservatives at least have a different tone of the criticism? So it would be, we're thankful that Obama seems to take Afghanistan seriously. And wants to tackle terrorism and believes we need to deal with the Al-Qaeda threat. We have a concern that the approach he's taking is not going to commit the necessary resources to achieve that goal. But at least give him cut him some slack and say he believes that it is. He's going to use his resources. He's not trying to. His desire is not to have a muddled policy that would fail in 10 years.
Well, I don't think...
He's not turning a blind eye to the issue altogether. He just might have a disagreement with you on how best to achieve the goal.
I don't think anyone thinks Obama wants to kill American servicemen unnecessarily. The conservatives just have a strong belief in how not to do that.
I would personally, just for my benefit, 'cause I know you like me, Conn, and I have to leave in a minute.
I know. I'm ready to go too.
I think it would just be delightful if this debate had a more measured tone to it, because obviously people are not going to agree.
More measured than what? What over the past 2 weeks about the Afghanistan debate has been troubling to you?
It hasn't gone off the rails yet, in my opinion.
Okay, so don't worry, be happy.
I think if Obama had a different strategy than McChrystal, I think it's not a fair criticism to say he hates the Pentagon, he hates the military brass, and he doesn't know what he's doing. He clearly wants America to be weak.
I think he doesn't know what he's doing is a fair argument. I think he wants a weaker America is a fair argument, because
he wants a weaker America.
Right.
That's a desired goal of Obama. I want to have a half-assed military presence in Afghanistan because I would love to have a weaker America. That's a fair argument to make.
Definitely.
That's insane.
Okay.
Should we leave it on that note?
We should leave it on that note.
Okay. Always a pleasure, Conn.
It is. Enjoy your 3 o'clock meeting.
I'll talk to you soon.